Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin, and you are watching The Digital Age. Tonight's show, once again, comes to you from the television studios of the Columbia University School of Journalism. With us is Joseph A. Califano, Jr. Joe Califano was the principal domestic advisor to President Lyndon Johnson, and 2 days after the Newtown massacre, Joe wrote a dynamite op-ed piece in the Washington Post in which he called on President Obama to take immediate action on gun control, lest he lose an opportunity. Joe, we're delighted to have you with us.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
Now, Joe, what parallels do you see between the situation confronting LBJ in 1968 and what is confronting Obama today?
Well, Lyndon Johnson had proposed gun control legislation, banning importation of these $10 guns, stopping mail order sales, no sales to minors. You could get a gun if you were 10 years old in those days, and licensing of every gun owner and registration of every gun. In 1966, couldn't get anything done. And then after Robert Kennedy's assassination, immediately after it, the day after it.
That was in June of 68.
In June of 68, he said, we're going to get our gun control legislation. Remember, we had the assassination of President Kennedy in 63, the assassination of Martin Luther King.
In March of 68.
Right, and then the assassination of Robert Kennedy in June. And on the Senate side, which was where we were having trouble, Senator Tidings of Maryland, who was a friend of Robert Kennedy, and a couple of other senators thought they had a better bill. And Johnson said, we've got to stop that. We have 2 weeks, maybe only 10 days, to get our bill out of that committee and passed, because otherwise the gun lobby will mobilize, organize, and kill it. And we couldn't dissuade Tidings, unfortunately. The Senate committee delayed. We were unable to get federal registration of every gun and federal licensing of every gun owner. We got the rest of the bill. When Johnson signed the bill, he said, you know, we were held back by a gun lobby, gave a very moving talk mentioning the 3 assassinations. When President Obama, when Newtown occurred, which traumatized the country, not just the state of Connecticut, we had a lame duck session of Congress, and I did the op-ed immediately. I was trying to figure out how could I get the president's attention. Fortunately, I wrote that op-ed the day after. The Washington Post published it on the Monday after, you said 2 days, and go for it right away. The president started talking about it. He didn't go for it. I think he could have passed a pretty tough bill, but he has kept up the heat now. His statements, incidentally, were like an echo of Johnson's statements, both about the gun lobby and about the guns in the United States.
How would you compare the strength of the gun lobby in 1968 and the strength of the gun lobby today?
I think it's strong, and I think it was very strong in 1968. There's no question about it. I think today, well, we do know that a few years ago, the Republicans took control of the House in good measure on the basis of the gun issue. There were other issues, but that was a big issue. I think today there's much more money in the sale of guns. So in addition to the NRA, we've got the whole gun manufacturing business and gun selling business. On the other hand, we didn't have social media. We didn't have 24-hour news coverage. And I think what Obama has apparently decided is, can't win in Washington, but maybe he can win in the country. And by going around the country and building up steam, he can get enough pressure, at least, as he has said in Minnesota, at least to get background checks on everybody.
Now, part of his campaign seems to be the photograph, the famous photograph of him skeet shooting at Camp David. Do you think that did the campaign any good?
Well, I doubt if it did, but it's very interesting. Very shrewd in the sense that they know that in the era of social media, when the internet and the picture goes everywhere, a little thing like that can be turned into a big story. But, you know, that was August 10th or whatever. We now have all these questions. How often has he done it since then? How How many times did he do it? He told the New Republic he did it always. We know, doubtful that he did it always. But it's a picture. It also shows his sensitivity to the gun lobby. I mean, he wants to show that he's not anti-gun. He's not anti-Second Amendment. What he wants to get rid of are the assault weapons, the big cartridges that carry 30 more bullets.
High-capacity magazines.
Right.
Well, we'll come to that. But in your piece, you argue if there were ever a moment for President Obama to learn from history, it is now.
I think that's right, Jim. I mean, I wish he had done it in the lame duck session. I truly believe he could have gotten elimination of those high-capacity magazines, or at least down to 10 maybe, and he could have gotten the background checks hands down. It'll be tougher now. You know, you remember, the longer this delays, I don't think time is on the side of the president or those who want gun control. I think time is on the side of the NRA. And remember, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Pat Leahy, a fine senator, also has said, you know, we'll have hearings, we're going to take our time, we're going to think this thing through. Harry Reid.
They both own guns.
Well, and Harry Reid is also very much supported by the NRA and the gun lobby, and it's a big issue in Nevada.
That's his home state.
That's his home state.
In Nevada, a lot of people carry guns.
In Nevada, a lot of people carry guns. Actually, from the surveys we've now seen that USA Today did of the Congress, there are two variations in gun ownership. One is Republicans are likely to own guns than Democrats in the Congress, Senate and House. But the geographic distribution is stunning. I mean, only a handful of people in the Northeast own guns, whereas overwhelming majorities of congressmen in the South and parts of the Midwest own guns.
Now, the urgency that you advocated was underscored by the moving testimony of former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords before the Senate, where in a halting voice she uttered just 72 powerful words, and let's listen to them.
This is an important conversation for our children, for our communities, for Democrats and Republicans. Speaking is difficult, but I need to say something important. Violence is a big problem. Too many children are dying. Too many children. We must do something. It will be hard, but the time is now. You must act. Be bold, be courageous. Americans are counting on you. Thank you.
She said, too many children, we must do something. The time is now, you must act. Now, they did act in a sense. I mean, the president convened the Biden group that came up with some recommendations. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think that all has been part of the campaign.
Yes.
You know, he's also said he's revitalizing his campaign organization, going to use them to get some of his programs passed. And he's going around the country now speaking about it. I think that's the way to get as effective a bill as you're going to be able to get. You know, Washington says there won't be any ban of assault weapons. That's not likely.
Although the president said he wants a ban on assault weapons.
Well, he said he wants it, but he said what he really expects to get is the background checks, and he hopes there will at least be a vote on assault weapons. I think he's saying let's have a vote on it and force people to one by one go up or down on that particular issue. The issue there is not only is that we had a ban on assault weapons
for 10 years,
and it apparently bears no relationship to the people who were killed or not killed. And also, as you know, being in New York, as you know and I know, we do have a police commissioner who made the point, the problem in urban areas is not assault weapons, it's the handgun. That's what kills people. Now we have these...
And that kills cops.
And that kills cops.
That's what Ray Kelly said.
That's correct. And so there's nothing in any of the proposed legislation except for the background checks. The background checks. That would be an inhibitor on the handgun issue. And the federal need is this problem of, New York City can have the toughest gun laws in the world, but if we don't have gun laws like that in other states, it's very easy to stick a gun in your pocket in the trunk of your car and bring it into New York City.
Yes, Kelly said most of the illegal guns come from out of state. And then they go to, as the law now stands, Joe, you can go to a gun show and buy a gun from anyone, and there's no background check at all. The private sales are exempt. And I think the proposed legislation tries to deal with that.
The proposed legislation does try and deal with that, and hopefully it will be able to deal with that. But there also are arguments that the proposed legislation that's in the Senate is not as strong as the original Dianne Feinstein bill was several years ago. So this is a tough issue. I think we're probably the only country in the world in which we have a Second Amendment in our Constitution, which gives people the right to bear guns, have guns, and which the Supreme Court has held an individual right.
That's right.
So that you and I, anybody, has a right to have a gun.
But they also said, even Justice Scalia said, there can be some reasonable regulation. It doesn't give you the right to have a bazooka in your house or a howitzer. I mean, they can regulate, and the federal government does regulate that.
And we also, you're absolutely right, and we also certainly have the right in all kinds of situations, including this one, to say that there are some people with mental illnesses who are deranged in one way or another who should not have that right. There can be reasonable restrictions on any constitutional right. I mean, it's the old statement about the First Amendment. You don't have the right to yell fire in a crowded theater.
When there is no fire.
When there is no fire.
Now, how many rounds does it take to defend your home? There was a woman who testified before the Senate that she needs 100 rounds to protect her brood in case 3 intruders come into her home.
Well, that, and then how many rounds do you need to kill a deer? I mean, if you have 30 rounds in your gun and you miss with the first 29, you probably shouldn't be out hunting.
It kind of takes the sport out of it.
Right.
Now, Mark Kelly, who was Gabby Gifford's husband, of course, said that Gifford's assailant carried a 33-round magazine, and he really stopped the rampage when he ran out of bullets. So if he'd had a 100-round magazine, the rampage presumably would have continued.
I think that's right, and I think if you look at what happened at Newtown, if that unspeakable incident, but if that individual had gone into that school with a rifle that only had 6 bullets in it, or a handgun that only had 6 bullets, been quite a different situation. I mean, as Vice President Biden said, these kids weren't just shot, they were riddled with bullets. I mean, there was just blood everywhere, and all these 6-year-olds.
And in fact, these high-capacity magazines by squeezing the trigger once, you can get off almost as many rounds as Al Capone's gang could in Chicago with Tommy guns, which are now banned.
Well, that's right, and and also they say, well, it's not an automatic weapon if you have to pull your finger like this.
Yes.
But how fast? How many times can you move your finger like that and be able to get a round off? I think there's a good chance, and I hope we can get rid of these high-capacity magazines. I mean, it's just, there's no need for an individual to have that. I understand the example you gave of the woman saying, I need more than 100 rounds to protect my home. But that's just not, I want to say it's irrational, but it defies common sense.
Let's go back to LBJ. He is remembered in history as being a master as president in his ability to deal with Congress and indeed to manipulate Congress, much as Abraham Lincoln was. How do you contrast his style with that of Obama today?
Well, I mean, I think Johnson was a creature of Congress. He was not a Texan. He was a Washingtonian. He'd been in Washington more than 30 years in the House, in the Senate, as vice president. He knew that town. He knew everybody's price. I mean, Obama is not a creature of Washington, for sure. And he also seems not to respect or want to spend time with people on the Hill of both parties. This is not just one party. I mean, a little example. Remember when Mitch McConnell, the Republican minority leader in the Senate, right after Obama's last election, said, right after Obama's first election, said, I'm going to devote myself to defeating Obama and make sure he doesn't have a second term. All right. Obama did nothing. If Lyndon Johnson had been president and Mitch McConnell had said that, he would have picked up the phone and he would have called Mitch McConnell, I believe, and said, Mitch, I know you want me out of here. I understand that. That's the way of the world. But I want you to come on over here tonight. I want to have a drink.
And
I
let's
want to
reason
talk
together.
to you. And let's reason together. And there are a few things we ought to try and get done. And let's try and get them done. I mean, that's sort of a little vignette that I think really captures the difference.
Well, an example might be as well when the Civil Rights Bill passed, and there were a number of people who got pens, and the first pen didn't go to Martin Luther King. Whom did it go to?
Went to Everett Dirksen, the Republican minority leader. And before that, Johnson kept saying to the Attorney General and all of everybody on the White House staff, with respect to the Voting Rights Act, let Dirksen write. Go over, work with Dirksen. Let this be Dirksen's bill. Let him, so long as we get what we want, let him be the author of it. And, and think of what he said that day. He said, if it were not for Everett Dirksen, this would be a bill, not a law. And that's very important. But there's an interesting similarity in what I think Obama is doing now. Remember Selma, Alabama, the tremendous march that Martin Luther King led for voting rights? That march was sparked by Lyndon Johnson, who said to Martin Luther King in January, Martin, you find the worst place in the South, where it has the fewest Negroes, that was the term in those days, that are entitled to vote out of the population, and you go down there, and you get it on television, you get all the leaders down there, and you get it broadcast, and then people will see it, and the guy driving a tractor on a farm will say, it isn't fair. And he said, and don't talk about it as the Negro's right to vote, talk about it as everybody's right to vote. And King did exactly, and Johnson said, you do that, and I'll shove this legislation through the Congress. Now, what I think Obama is doing is going out there and trying to rev up these interest groups and trying to rev them up on the gun control issue in a way that he really hasn't done before. The issue now is whether when he comes back to Washington, he'll pick up that telephone and say to senators and members of Congress, now come on, you got to deliver. You got to deliver.
Now, Johnson's technique was more than putting his arm around people, giving them a drink, and trying to get them to reason with him. He also liked to cajole people. He liked to threaten people. He really reputedly liked to bully people into going his way. And one of his quotes that I think you're fond of using is he says, you never tell someone in politics to go to hell unless you can send them there. Now, this means to me, make good on your own threats.
Well, that's true. And, for example, there was a senator from Idaho, Senator Frank Church, who was telling Johnson why he was against the war in Vietnam, and he kept citing Walter Lippmann, one of the great columnists of that era. And Johnson said to Church, okay, Frank, the next time you want a dam in the Snake River in Idaho, call up Walter Lippmann and see if you can get it from him.
Right.
I mean, he was very conscious of that. And also, here in New York, a group of liberal congressmen voted against raising the debt limit, a current issue today. And they said, well, one of them said, well, there aren't enough money for domestic programs. We don't have any money for housing. And the president said to me, you call him up, Congressman Ottinger from Westchester.
Dick Ottinger, sure.
and you tell him he doesn't think there's enough money for public housing. We're going to put a public housing project right in the middle of his fancy Westchester district, and we'll show all the citizens in that district, all his constituents, there's plenty of money for public housing. We did. The vote changed.
Now, what do you think? Let's just go back to gun control for a moment. The NRA has kind of shot itself in the foot with because in 1999, after Columbine, the NRA said, "Oh, we ought to have background checks, and we ought not to have any exceptions." Now they say they're against background checks, and indeed they say we should have guards in schools. Because Obama's children have guards, and all children should have the same type of protection. I mean, isn't this terrible PR for the NRA?
Sure, it's terrible PR, and it's hypocrisy. I mean, I think their switch on. I think personally, my hunch is their switch on background checks is to make even that a fight, so that it's something that ultimately they can get defeated on, and they can win on the other things. The guns in schools is a very interesting issue because the city of Newtown, the city council or the Board of Education up there, voted to have an armed guard in every school.
And Clinton considered that during his presidency.
And Clinton did, and that's sort of the NRA argument, the good guys ought to have a gun.
Right. But, I mean, suppose you could have any kind of gun control that you wanted. What do you think we should have? What is reasonable?
I think you should absolutely ban assault weapons in the private sector, these automatic weapons. I think they should just be banned. Now, that won't solve the problem completely because we've got probably now millions, not just hundreds of thousands of them already out there. But I do think they should be banned. I think if every gun in this country had to be registered, just like every car has to be registered, and if every gun owner had to be licensed, just like every driver has to be licensed, we would have real gun control. I think absolutely.
What about mandatory insurance, such as you have for a car?
I hadn't even thought about that. I think that's a damned interesting idea.
Yeah. I mean, the insurers would have to investigate the gun owner before they would underwrite the policy, and that investigation would be a measure of protection.
And the insurance companies would be delighted to calculate the odds that he'll misuse the gun.
That's right.
And give him coverage.
Yeah.
Very, very good point.
And all right, so what else? So we have licensing, we have registration, maybe insurance. What else?
And as part of the licensing, you could deal with the background check. Just the way you have to have an eye exam or a test, you could have the licensing also cover mental health in one way or another, or the background of the individual. If in most states, if you've been driving recklessly and you've been driving drunk or you've had a lot of accidents, it's pretty tough to get a driver's license. So,
or they'll revoke the one you have, and that would happen with guns as well.
And if the issue is states' rights, I think the answer is if the state has a very strict, tough licensing, then the federal government will not put its licensing in on top of that. But I think it should be some kind of uniform licensing, whether administered by the states or the feds.
Would you advocate civil commitment of the mentally disturbed?
No, I think there's a difficult issue there. But we emptied the state hospitals, which you and I can probably remember was dramatized in a movie called Snake Pit with Olivia de Havilland. It changed the whole country's attitude about them. We emptied out those hospitals. We have a lot of drugs that make individuals who have mental health problems capable of leading reasonably good lives, both as a consequence of their own individual human dignity and with their families and what have you. Now, there are people that are so deranged, psychotic, in a way that is impossible to deal with them or trust them with a gun or maybe trust them in society. But I think you have to think long and hard before we imprison people. I mean, you've been a great prosecutor, and you have a sense of that. And putting somebody behind bars and putting them in prison is a very dramatic move.
Armed guards in the schools, how do you come out on that one?
Well, we both know that we have armed guards in a lot of tough neighborhoods in urban areas across this country. I'd rather not see another gun in the school, but I think I'd leave it to the local boards of education to deal with that problem.
Well, we have air marshals on planes.
Well, we do have air marshals on planes, but they're federal marshals. They're very well trained.
Now, just to go back to LBJ, what lessons do you think future presidents can learn from the way he dealt with Congress?
Oh, I mean, look, it takes enormous care and feeding. Focus is very important. What do you really want? And I think that's very important. I think Obama seems to have focus on guns now. He seems to have focus on immigration. Johnson knew civil rights, poverty. He knew what we wanted to do every year. He knew what the overarching issues were. And everybody in that administration, or not just everybody on the staff, and everybody in Congress knew.
So could even LBJ have gotten gun control, comprehensive gun control, out of this Congress? Yes or no?
I think yes, if we had moved out of this Congress.
Yes.
In a lame duck session, I think he could have been able to do that in the lame duck session.
Joe Califano, this has been just marvelous.
Well, it's been great.
Thank you so much for coming by. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. For the digital age, I'm Jim Zirin. Please visit our website at www.digitalage.org. Good night and all the best.